welcome to another edition of the Amazing Art Show. I'm your host, Angie Woolsey. Have you ever wondered why flowers have vibrant, vibrant colors and wonderful, wonderful smells? Well, flowers have these things for a reason. They have vibrant colors and they have very, very fragrant kind of smells that come from these flowers to entice insects to come over, because these insects ensure that they will carry the pollen off and it will pollinate the flower, and that kind of has to do with our project today. We are going to be doing a very floral project today, and our artist that we're going to be speaking about today is Georgia O'Keeffe. She has kind of inspired this project. So let me tell you a few things that you're going to need, because you kind of need some weird things today. So let me tell you a little bit about it. The most strange thing that you're going to need is you're going to need to go to like a beauty store, and you're going to need to get an applicator bottle. And they're really cheap. They're like less than $1 usually. And you are going to fill that with the cheapest black latex house paint that you can find. It can be, you don't want it to be high gloss, but it can have a little bit of a sheen to it. That's okay. And you can just get a little bitty thing of it, but you want to make sure that it's latex and water-based latex. And you're going to mix a little bit of water in with it to dilute it just a little bit, but not too much. So I would say, you know, half latex paint and just maybe a third of water, just very little bit of water. And then you just want it to where it shakes around in there pretty good, but it's not too runny. So do a little test run before you do anything else. The other thing you're going to need is some kind of thick paper. And if you would like, you can use a watercolor paper is fine. And I'm going to let you decide however and whatever shape you want to make and how big you want to make your piece. You're also going to need some watercolors, just the ones that come in the little trays like this would be fine. I like to work with a couple because I like to mix my colors and mix different tints and shades. And I'm a bad girl because I mix them actually in with the paints, which is a big no-no at school. Don't be doing that, but at home, if they're your own, you can do it. So you'll need that. You're going to need a little bit of glue. You'll definitely need some water and some paint brushes, a pencil, maybe an eraser. And you're going to need some inspiration pieces, some flowers to look at. So you can either, maybe mom has a calendar that has flowers on it, or magazines that have some flowers in it, or you could even pull some pictures up off the internet or something like that. All right, so I'm going to give you a few minutes to go gather up your things and get your station all ready to go. And I'll meet you back here and we'll be ready to start our project.
I am folding the pants. The pants are long. Do they go on my head? Do they? Do the pants go on my head? No. They go on.
Everyday moments can become teaching moments because learning starts long before school does. Give your child the start they need at bornlearning.org.
So we are back and we're ready to get started. I talked to you a little bit in the intro about Georgia O'Keeffe, and we were going to be looking at a little bit of her artwork. And Georgia O'Keeffe was a brilliant artist as far as I'm concerned. She loved to paint nature. She never painted people. She never really painted animals. She loved to paint things out of nature. And her flower pieces are some of my very, very favorites. She really took something as natural and as simple as a flower and really showed it to you in a different and very interesting way. Sometimes it was very abstract. It would be her canvas would be so full of color that you wouldn't exactly know what it was. It wasn't maybe until you looked at the title that you could see that it would be maybe an extreme close-up of a flower or a plant or something like that. She also very, very vibrant colors and very good use of shadowing and shading and tinting. And so that was kind of my inspiration piece whenever I got started on this project today. So I would encourage you, if you can, maybe get online or maybe check out a book from the library that has Georgia O'Keeffe's work in it so that you could really take a look at it. We've got one here to look at today that is called Petunia. It is an oil on canvas. you're looking at it, it's an extreme close-up. So it's a little abstracted because you're not used to looking at a flower this close. You're used to looking at a flower, you know, as at a distance from you. So as you're working today and we're creating our floral pictures that we're working on, I want you to kind of keep in mind that perspective. You might want your whole piece of paper to be a very large, up-close kind of view of a flower, and you're more than welcome to do that. My example that I'm going to be working on today, I've actually taken lots of different types of flowers and kind of combined them in an interesting arrangement so that we can look at it a little differently that way, not so up close, a little more at a distance, but also arrange things interesting so that you have good balance on your paper. So we're going to get started. I want to talk to you very quickly about your paper. I told you earlier that I'm going to let you decide what you want to do as far as your paper goes. I would encourage you, anytime you're getting started on a project, think about your paper and how your overall project is going to look at the end. And you want to choose an interesting paper shape. It doesn't have to be, you know, that standard piece of paper that you get out of your paper pack. You can trim it down. You could make it into a different shape. It could be oval. It could be an abstracted kind of free form shape, would be very interesting. My piece here is very long and narrow, and just because I just thought that would be visually interesting to do. So we're going to get started, and basically what I'm going to do is just very lightly, because since we're going to be using a watercolor, remember that those are very transparent at times and you can see your pencil lines. So I want you to sketch out some of your flowers that you want to use. I would encourage you to try to use different types of flowers, different sizes. You know, some of them might be really, really large. Some of them, you know, more of the trailing kind of flower, not so much the blossoms that are big and with full petals here, but maybe something that kind of trails off a little bit and maybe narrows as it gets to the tip of the flower. So think of a good variety. You could also include maybe flowering trees as well. So you might include a branch in there or something like that. So I'm going to give you a second to kind of get your ideas down and kind of sketch things out. Remember that you want to do it very lightly. That's the definition of a sketch. It's a very, very light drawing because we don't want to be able to see those pencil lines underneath there. I've already gotten mine sketched out, so I am ready to go. And we're going to actually be moving on into the watercolor part. So I'm going to give you a second. You can get your sketch done, and as you are doing that, I'm going to start working on my painting. Now, watercolor is one of the hardest things I've ever done. And to be totally honest with you, I did not even like to watercolor until a long, long time ago. But I finally have kind of come into terms with it, and I like it, and I enjoy it now, but it's a little tricky for me. So I'm going to kind of let you in on a few little hints that I've learned as I've been trying to water paint, and a few little hints, maybe that'll help you along. So first things first, like I said, I usually have several of trays of paint. You know, you can also buy the tubes of water paint, and those work great too. I usually have those at home, but this is what we had at school, and I knew this is probably what you guys would be able to get your hands on as well, so I was trying to use this as an example. So get several so that you can make several tints and shades as you're working. Remember that a tint is your basic color and you add white to it, creates a tint, and then a shade is your basic color with black to it, which will create your shade. So we will be using lots of different tints and shades today as we're completing our project. So I think that I'm going to start on my biggest and largest flower first. And remember that the whole point of watercolor is that you have to have water. So make sure that you keep that brush really good and wet. And usually one thing that I like to do that I think works really, really well is if you'll take your brush and just let some of the water drip down in there. And that kind of helps to get the paint loosened up and moist. And you can kind of start manipulating the color a little bit better then. Right now, it's probably not a very deep color. It's probably a pretty light color. So I'm just going to kind of test it. It's pretty light. So I typically like to start with my darkest colors first. So I'm going to use this a little bit, but then I think I'm going to go into my darker color. Now you'll notice the longer that sits there, the more concentrated the color becomes. It's kind of loosening up the paint and the water are mixing together. Now one misconception that I had about watercolor was that you had to paint every single thing. And actually what I think is some of the most interesting watercolors I've ever seen are pictures that they actually had places where there wasn't paint. There was just your paper color. Or maybe there was a really, really light shade and then they came back over with a darker, deeper kind of color. So I want you to keep that in mind. You do not have to paint the whole thing the same color. That's where we run into a lot of problems. And when I was little, that's what I used to do. I painted the whole thing the same color. Then I tried to come back and darken places and highlight places. And with watercolor, that's really hard to do because it's so wet and everything runs together. And it's very hard to manipulate sometimes. So, like I said, usually I like to start with my darkest areas and then let that dry, work in another area, and then I like to come back and work in my lighter areas. So at this time, I'm going to do that real quick. So I'm going to kind of really dig down in here so I can get some good color on my brush. Also remember, especially when you are water painting, it is very important to keep your fingers off of your brush bristles because you have got all kinds of oils on your finger. Even after you wash your hands, you've got oils on your fingers, and you want your brush to be able to accept the water. And remember that oil repels water, so when you run your fingers across there, you get little oil residue left on your brush, and then your brushes will not work very good, especially for watercolor if you do that. I'm not real happy with how dark that turned out, so I'm going to come back in here and get another one of my trays. I'm going to darken this up a little bit. Now remember, watercolor is also one of those things, at least in my opinion. I know that there are some people, like I said, watercolor is not really my thing. I'm just now kind of getting a grasp on it. But there are some people that are expert watercolorists, and they can probably do it exact, but I cannot. But so I don't try to worry so much about if it's exactly the way I wanted. I just kind of try to look at my flower that I'm looking at to get my ideas, see where there are lighter areas, see where there are darker areas, and then I just try to kind of get into those areas, and I'm not even following my pencil drawing exactly. I'm kind of just going along with what I see that I need to do. And like I said, I'm doing my darkest areas and then I'll come back and hit my lighter areas. And remember also there are some times when you want to just leave some areas white. So I'm going to kind of come in here and I'm going to purposely leave some areas unpainted. Remember also, this is kind of a rose. Doesn't look exactly like a rose, but it's a little bit like a rose. And with roses, typically darkest in the center, and then it gets lighter as it goes out. So I'm trying to kind of keep that in mind as I'm applying my color. Actually lift this up a little bit. A lot of times, watercolors will wet their paper and then they will work on top of wet paper. I don't really like to do that. I usually like to have my paper dry and then work wet. So I'm just going to kind of continue in this area, and I think I'm just about finished, and I think I'm just going to kind of leave this, and I want it to dry a little bit, because if you try to work too fast with watercolor, everything kind of runs together. So I'm just going to I've got this kind of where I want it, and I think I'm going to just leave it there, and I'm going to start working in another area. I think I'm going to start working on this, this leaf here. So I know that I'm going to want lots of different shades and tints of green, and I usually like to start with my darkest green first. And I think to myself, all right, where would there be shadows being casted on this? And so, or sometimes I even look at it and say, okay, I want to show that this one is further in the distance, so it's going to be darker. It's going to, the color's going to recede. And then this one, I want it to appear that it's the closest, so it's going to have the most vibrant color. So I want to kind of keep that in mind as I start to paint. This leaf here that starts to go behind this other one, obviously is going to be a little bit darker, and you want to be able to show that with your color. So I'm going to start, actually I'm going to get my paint ready, and then I'm going to create a shade of green, which means I'm going to add what to it? I'm going to add black to it. And it doesn't take a whole lot of black, so don't get it so black that you can't tell what it is. All right, so I'm going to, actually I think I want a little bit more. All right, so I'm going to come in here, and remember, if you get a little bit out of the lines, it is not that big of a deal. Something else that I want you to kind of keep in mind as you're working is, you know, don't make all of your leaves the same. And as you're working, I want you to keep in mind, don't forget about the veins that are in the leaves, because those are definitely going to show and are definitely a very, very vital part to your leaf. Without those veins, it couldn't survive. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to, like I said earlier, I'm going to purposefully, I'm going to leave some areas white. That's going to kind of create a little bit of a highlight, like maybe there's a little bit of light shining on the leaf. And I'm going to come in here and add my color. And remember that if you don't like something, let it dry. You can always come back and work on that a little bit. This time, since I'm getting on this side of the leaf, which I think would have a little more light to it, I'm going to come in here. I added a little more green to my shade. And I'm not really painting per se, I'm really just kind of dabbing the color on and spreading it. So keep in mind, you don't have to paint the whole surface. I think you'll actually find that you're a lot more successful at it if you will just kind of dab the color in where you want it. All right, now I'm staying away from my flower as close. I'm getting as close as I can without touching it, because remember that as long as that paint is wet, that you will have, it'll all run together, and you want to try to kind of avoid that. Although, and there are some circumstances where that really gives you a very nice effect, and so that's okay. In this particular instance, I'm trying to kind of keep things a little separate. Now, I've just about got this leaf where I want it, but remember that as leaves grow and as they age, they sometimes change color. And so I think I'm going to come in and I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to my leaf. And I'm just dabbing the color in there a little bit. And it's okay if it looks like it's kind of setting on the surface. It will eventually kind of blend in there. All right, and while I'm at it, I'm just going to come over here. And I'm going to start adding some color here as well. Now remember that I told you earlier I was going to make this leaf. Right now on my paper, it is my largest leaf. And I'm trying to convey to the audience that this leaf is the one that's closest to you. So I've done that with shape and size, and I'm now going to do it as I begin to add color to it. The things that are the most vibrant color appear to be the things that are closest to you. Also, when you're watercoloring, you need to be receptive to things that may happen as you're working. You may get a drip somewhere, and if you do, it's not the end of the world and you don't have to start over. You just have to find a creative way to bring it into your picture. All right, so I'm coming in, I've added a little more green, And I'm actually going to come in and I'm just going to kind of dab it in a few spots, and I'm going to let it sit a little bit, and then I'm going to come back and work there again. Also, you guys can't really see, but there are times when I dip my brush all the way in the water, and then there are times that I get just a little bit because I'm trying to manipulate the color that I want to get. And you do that by how much water you add to your brush, or don't add to your brush, depending on which one you're doing. Remember, I think I started to talk to you guys earlier about don't make all your leaves the same shape. Found a very interesting website that had pictures and examples of all different types of leaf shapes that you can create, and that, or that you'll also find in nature. That would be a great thing to pull before you got started on this project, because definitely can use that knowledge. There are lots of people that they don't have to have something to look at, and then there are other people that have to have something to look at. I'm one of those people. I have to have something to look at. It just kind of helps me get my thoughts. I'm not copying what I see, but it's helping me to create the image that I want to create in a more realistic way, especially if I'm going for realism. All right. Now, I could continue to work on this, and watercolor is one of those things you have to let it dry, come back. Let it dry, come back. So I'm going to continue working. I've actually got one that I've already been working on, and I'm going to pull that one over here in a second, and we are going to kind of fast forward, and we're going to pretend like you're all finished. And I am too. One last thing before I move on to that next part. Keep in mind, even though you may be painting a yellow rose or a red rose or even any other type of flower, I want you to think about hardly anything is a solid, straight color. So keep in mind, you can use tints and shades. You may also want to mix in some different colors, and I'll show you my example here in a few minutes and think about that. But what made me think about it was something that I went back and did was I got a little bit of purple, and you want it very diluted with the water, and you can diluted it too much. You can come in and add some really nice shadowing into your picture. And the last little thing I'm going to say before I grab my other stuff here, something else is if you are painting and you just run into a major emergency and everything's running all together, take some paper towels, kind of wad them up, and if you will just kind of lay them out, it will help soak up the water. I stamped. You'll soak up that water. You'll also sometimes get a very interesting texture on your pieces. So you can also kind of manipulate things that way. If you have something you're painting right next to it and it starts to run over into the other things, just get the corner of your towel and you can absorb some of that water so that things don't run together quite so much. So don't toss it out. Think of a creative way. Be a problem solver. Think of a way that you can manipulate it the way you need it to go. All right? Okay, so I'm going to put oh, man.
It's okay.
Oh,
You pick it up right there. Just put your hands back down like you had it.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to put this to the side, and I'm going to grab my example that I've already finished painting, and we'll take a look at that. We'll go from there. All right, so here is my finished painting, and I did choose a background color, and you will want to do the same thing as well. I was talking to you earlier a little bit about mixing in some of that purple, and if you'll look, you'll see in a couple places where I've got that mixed in, create some really nice kind of shade effects as well as just bringing some depth into your picture. Also, I came in, I added purple thorns, and so be creative with your color. It doesn't have to be exactly what you would see in nature. Georgia O'Keeffe would not stand for that. Neither should you. Mix in some of those other interesting colors. All right? Okay, so the next part, and this is the most fun part, I think, is that black latex paint that we had talked about earlier. You are actually going to be, you needed the applicator bottle because you're actually going to be applying it onto your artwork. And there are several different ways that you may want to do this. Try not to be so controlling with it that you follow your lines exactly. I want you to just kind of kind of use those lines as a guideline, but you don't necessarily have to follow it exactly, okay? So as you go, you can start wherever you want. Remember that as you're working, your hand may kind of rest in an area, so you want to either keep your hand up and work all in one direction, or if you're one of those people that likes to work here, there, and everywhere, you need to be really, really careful because you will accidentally get your arms and things. I'm one of those people, I try one side and then I work my way across. All right, so I'm gonna start, and you're basically outlining. My paint isn't working. I'm clogged up here. Hang on a second. Okay, here we go. All right, now you're just going to kind of follow your line. And remember that if it is not exact, it is okay. Now getting around your little leaves can be somewhat tricky, so I usually like to save those till the end. And because this is a branch that I'm doing, I am kind of making my line real, it's not very straight. It's very organic in nature. It is not straight and rigid like a ruler, because remember, nothing you find in nature is going to be that straight. All right, so like I said, leaves can be a little tricky. And so usually when I do a leaf, I just kind of try to get the essence of the shape. I don't necessarily do it exact. And sometimes on these itty bitty little small ones, I might just do maybe the bottom part and maybe a little center line, and I leave the rest so that you don't end up covering up the whole thing. And as far as my flowers go, I usually don't even follow my lines very much on that. I just kind of come in here. I don't really outline them even. I just kind of add some accent colors. When you tip your applicator bottle upside down, it tends to run pretty quick. So you have to work pretty quick. You don't have a lot of time to, you know, get it just right. Your applicator bottle might be a little different though. Just kind of depends. So you're basically just going to continue outlining everything. Remember, it does not have to be exact. As you work, you're just basically, that black really makes it pop. I love adding black to my picture. I just like the effect that I get. And don't forget that you can add extra lines that you may not have had in your original drawing. That is okay. You are never sealed into something. You can always kind of change. I'm going to come in here. All right. Now something else, when you get finished doing all this, something else that you might want to think about doing, depending on your preference, of course, is I like to come in and add some kind of a pattern to my background, as if this was maybe some wallpaper. So I'm just going to come in and I'm going to do some dots. Now I would wait and do these at the very end. All right, but you can kind of see how it's starting to look. All right, I'm going to show you my finished example and show you one more little step that you need to do. All right, my finished example is, obviously the background's a little bit different. I did a different color, but same concept. I outlined everything, let it dry really, really good, and then I came in and I ended up gluing it onto just a black piece of paper, which also helps with those black accents that we added. So it really helps your artwork pop. So that is it. That is our project for today. We're just about finished. Let's hear about the quote for the day. I had to create an equivalent for what I felt about what I was looking at, not copy it, by Georgia O'Keeffe. All right, I think those were some very wise words from Miss Georgia O'Keeffe. Very quickly, before we go for today, I wanted to show you, I showed you what my example with the blue background looked like, and I wanted to show you really quickly what my yellow one would kind of look like if I had it all glued together here. So very, very nice. These are fabulous. They look great. I've had some of my students work on these and they all just turned out fabulous. All very different, but fabulous. So I'm going to leave you on that note, and I hope that your project turns out as well as mine did. So thanks so much for joining us today. Now go out and make some amazing art.